You've ended the relationship. You've done the journaling. You've had the conversations, drawn the boundaries, maybe even spent time in therapy. And yet somehow, you find yourself in the same dynamic again. Different person, different name, different circumstances on the surface, but the same emotional architecture underneath. The same pain, the same patterns. You keep asking yourself why. Carl Jung would tell you that you're asking the wrong question. The real question isn't why you keep choosing the wrong people. It's why a part of you keeps needing them. This is where most people fail. They treat repeating relationship patterns as a problem of judgment, as if better decision-making or a clearer checklist will fix it. But the unconscious mind doesn't operate through logic. It operates through magnetism. It draws you toward what it recognizes, not what is good for you. And what it recognizes most powerfully are the emotional wounds it has never fully processed. Jung called the hidden side of your personality the shadow, not a metaphor for evil or darkness in the dramatic sense, but a psychological container. Every trait, emotion, desire, or behavior that was rejected by your early environment got pushed into this container. Not destroyed, not healed, simply hidden. And here's the critical mechanism that most people miss. What you bury in the shadow doesn't stay dormant. It projects. Projection is the unconscious act of seeing your own buried material in other people. When you feel an irrational, disproportionate pull towards someone, or an irrational, disproportionate revulsion, you are almost certainly in the presence of a projection. The other person has become a screen onto which your unconscious is casting its own unresolved content. You aren't seeing them clearly. You are seeing a reflection of your own interior world. This is where the repeating cycle begins, not in your choices, in your projections. Think about the type of person you consistently attract or are attracted to. The emotionally unavailable one, the one who needs saving, the one who seems strong but eventually collapses, the one who mirrors your own unexpressed anger back at you in ways that feel familiar and intolerable at once. These patterns are not coincidences, and they are not bad luck. They are the unconscious running a program it has been running since childhood, trying to resolve what was never resolved by recreating the original conditions of the wound. Jung called this process repetition compulsion, though it was Freud who named it. Jung deepened our understanding of the archetypal forces driving it. The psyche doesn't repeat pain out of weakness. It repeats it because, on a deep structural level, it believes that this time the wound might finally be healed. This time, the unavailable person might stay. This time, the person who abandoned you might choose differently. The unconscious is not irrational. It is tragically logical in a way the conscious mind can barely access. Now here is the uncomfortable truth most shadow work content refuses to say clearly. You are not a passive victim of your patterns. You are an active participant in them. Not because you were broken, but because a part of you has organized your entire relational identity around these dynamics. Your nervous system has calibrated itself to what feels familiar. Familiar isn't safe, but it feels like safety. That distinction is everything. You think you're growing when you intellectually understand your patterns, but intellectual understanding without embodied integration is just a more sophisticated way of staying stuck. You can name your attachment style, describe your mother wound, trace the origin of your abandonment fears, and still walk directly into the same relationship. Because the shadow doesn't respond to analysis, it responds to integration. And integration requires something most people are genuinely not prepared to do, to stop looking outward for the source of the pattern, and to start looking at what inside of you keeps generating it. Here is where the psychology gets uncomfortable, because once you understand projection, once you accept that your repeating relationship cycles are being driven by your own unconscious material, you have to face a question that is genuinely difficult to sit with. What exactly are you projecting? And more importantly, what does it say about the parts of yourself you have refused to acknowledge? Jung identified specific archetypal figures that live within the unconscious, inner structures that shape how you relate to others. For men, the primary relational archetype is the anima, the internalized feminine. For women, the animus, the internalized masculine. These aren't just symbolic concepts. They are functional psychological forces that determine who you are attracted to, what you need from a partner, and what you are unconsciously trying to complete through relationship. When the anima or animus is undeveloped, when it carries wounds from early caregivers, from absent parents, from relationships where love was conditional, it projects those wounds directly onto romantic partners. This is why the person who had an emotionally cold father keeps choosing emotionally unavailable partners. Not because they lack self-worth, though that may also be true, but because the undeveloped animus is still carrying the unfinished psychological business of that original relationship. It is searching for resolution in the external world because resolution was never reached internally. You think you're choosing a partner. You are actually casting a role in an unconscious psychological drama that began before you were old enough to understand what love was supposed to feel like. This is the mind shift that changes everything. Your relationships are not separate from your inner world. They are your inner world, externalized. Now consider what this means for modern life in 2026. You are navigating relationships inside a culture that actively discourages depth. Emotional outsourcing has become normalized. You process your feelings through content, through distraction, through constant social stimulation. The average person scrolling through their feed at 1 a.m., feeling a vague ache they cannot name, is not avoiding boredom. They are avoiding the shadow, and the longer you avoid it, the more pressure it builds. The more pressure it builds, the more forcefully it projects. The more forcefully it projects, the more intense and destabilizing your relationship patterns become. You think you're growing, but you're actually feeding your shadow every time you intellectualize your pain instead of feeling it. Every time you reframe a wound instead of sitting inside it. Every time you jump from one relationship into the next because solitude forces you into proximity with yourself. Here's another truth that is rarely stated. The shadow contains not only your wounds, but your disowned strengths. The parts of yourself you were told were too much, too intense, too needy, too ambitious, too angry, too soft. Those went into the shadow too, and you will project those outward as well, in a different way. You will be inexplicably drawn to people who embody those qualities. You will admire them excessively, resent them, feel both inspired and threatened. That dynamic is also shadow projection. That is also unfinished interior work. The unconscious doesn't need you to stay broken. It just needs you to stay unaware. So what does real integration actually require? Not a weekend retreat. Not a better morning routine. It requires developing what Jung called the transcendent function. The capacity to hold tension between opposites within yourself without collapsing into one side or the other. To hold both your strength and your vulnerability, your need for connection and your fear of it, your anger and your grief. Integration is the act of reclaiming what you split off, not as performance, but as lived experience inside your body and behavior. Practically, this means when a relationship pattern triggers you, when you feel that irrational pull, that disproportionate rage, that familiar devastation, you stop asking what the other person did. You ask what and you just got activated. You get curious about the projection instead of acting it out. You trace the emotional charge back to its origin, not to assign blame to your past, but to locate where in your psyche the unfinished business lives. You do this consistently, not once. The shadow is not integrated in a single breakthrough moment. It is integrated through sustained, honest, uncomfortable attention over time. The cycle breaks when you stop needing the external relationship to complete something the internal work was always meant to resolve. That is not a romantic conclusion. It is a psychological one, and it is the only one that actually holds.